crossing that threshold, you entered into a completely arbitrary and lawless world. There are no laws there, absolutely none. Only their will, their blind and crude will.
They overpowered me. They put handcuffs on me, leg irons on me, slammed me to the floor, put my feet on a chair, steel chair. So I was lying with my feet in the air, and they went on and on, beating the soles of my feet. It's bloody painful.
I was still shaking. All my body was shaking because of the electric shocks. And for a long time. So I couldn't sleep, and there was people screaming and crying in there.
I still have nightmares. Sometimes every day in the week, but sometimes only 4 days during the whole week.
This is the opening of a Charles Bronson movie called The Evil That Men Do. It's about a doctor who's an expert in torture. He sells his knowledge of the latest techniques to interested governments.
I was arrested with my sister and her husband. They said we had been giving guns to the rebels, but it was a lie.
Bronson's a retired contract killer, but he's persuaded back into business to do one last job, eliminate the doctor and his accomplices.
You're too smart for the job, Cannell.
Looking at a film like this, you can, I suppose, have some sympathy for the Bronson method. But in the real world, it misses the point. Individual torturers exist because governments commission and condone their work. To stop them, you don't need retired assassins. What is needed, as this recent Amnesty report points out, is political will. And that, in part, is what this film is about. I was 12 years old when my brothers and I were taken to our local cinema to see the first newsreels of the concentration camps. Until then, the war had been for us the stuff of heroes and headlines. But 7 years later, I was a soldier, and I suppose for the first time saw that cruelty and atrocity were not confined to our enemy. I'd been posted to Korea as part of my national service, a subaltern in the military police. We were stationed in front of what was called the stay-back line. Attached to us was an interrogation unit. It was run by a genial American major and staffed mainly by Koreans and Chinese. Sometimes prisoners of war were tortured. My tent backed onto the unit's compound, and the screams I heard there still echo in my mind. The most sobering thing of all was to realize how ordinary, even how pleasant, a man who inflicts torture on another can be. Later, I went to Vietnam, a filmmaker now, where much worse things happened. Most films about torture, most reports about it, deal with countries where torture is well documented. Police states, military dictatorships, die-hard communist regimes. But condemning these countries alone is too easy. Throughout my life, mostly making films in different parts of the world, I've come across reasons for believing that our own responsibility in the free democracies of the West is much greater than we like to think. These are the remains of people who were tortured and murdered in Argentina, legacy of the military junta. Now the democracies of the West deplore what happened, but then we helped their armed forces and sold them weaponry, and not in ignorance. The junta was still firmly in power when Jacobo Timmerman, a respected newspaper editor, told the world of what he'd undergone in one of his country's jails.
This is the first phase of torture, to take a man by surprise, without allowing him any reflex defense, even psychological. The man's hands are shackled behind him, his eyes blindfolded. No one says a word. He's led to what may be a canvas bed or a table, stripped, doused with water, tied to the ends of it, hands and legs outstretched, and then the application of electric shocks begins. The amount of electricity transmitted by the electrodes is regulated so that it merely hurts or burns or destroys. It's impossible to shout. You howl. At the onset of this long human howl, someone with soft hands supervises your heart. Someone places a piece of rubber in your mouth to prevent you from biting your tongue or destroying your lips. A brief pause, and then it starts all over again.
Luis Munoz comes from Chile, a country to whom we still sell our military hardware. He's now exiled in London, but it was one morning in '73 that he kissed his wife, Diana, goodbye, took a bus, and she took a taxi. That evening he waited for her, but she didn't return. She'd been caught in a police ambush. Sometime later, he was to find that she had died under torture. Eventually, he too was caught. Luis Munoz is one of the first people I talked to about the experience of torture. You feel intrusive when you do that. I was prying into something which has an unspoken, dreadful intimacy.
Somehow you feel that you have been part of it. You have been, I'm not the torturer. I am the person who has been tortured. But I've been part of it. You see, you feel responsible somehow. I didn't do it, but I was there. I saw it. I saw the people being tortured. And it's awful and it's dirty. And in telling you this, in telling people listening to this, it's dirty. I feel ashamed.
Inelia Avila is also a refugee from Chile. Today, she and her family live in Nottingham. She used to be a lecturer in mathematical education at the University of Chile in Valparaiso. She and her husband were supporters of the former socialist president, Salvador Allende. They were arrested because they were also active trade unionists. It happened in the early hours. They came and ransacked their house, allowed her to drop off her children with a friend, and then they were taken together to a place where Inelia Avila was tortured in front of her husband, and he in front of her.
I was always afraid of electricity when I was a girl. When I was in that room and they were settling me down for torture, really. I was blindfolded and they sat me in a chair and they were tying me to the chair and tying things in my fingers, a sensitive part of my body. I said, what happened? So they told me, we're going to put an electricity in your body. That was terrible, really. It was, I said, God. It was, I thought I was dying. I would die with that.
Keith Carmichael now lives in Houston, Texas. Educated at Westminster Public School and Oxford University, commissioned into the Scots Guards, he went on to become managing director of a British construction company working in Saudi Arabia. It was there, due to a commercial dispute, he fell foul of his business partner, a prince of the royal family. It led to his arrest by the secret police. His treatment is not an isolated example. Other foreigners in Saudi Arabia have known similar ordeals. In Keith Carmichael's case, the process of degrading and breaking him down involved not only torture, but assaults by the guards who on one occasion tried to bugger him.
And I don't know how I fought, but I drew on everything, and I managed to fight tooth and claw, shouting, and they did not, none of them penetrated me, though they beat me down onto the floor.
Is there some part of you felt they could never touch?
My inner feelings, I thought that you cannot reach. you cannot enter here. As long as I remain sane, my mind is sane, is in its senses, you cannot reach in here. That is mine. It's like, how could I put it in a chess game, and this is the king. And you protect yourself. You do anything to protect the king. Here is the king.
While I was in the secret police headquarters, when they very nearly broke me, I appealed to God. And so I felt that, you know, I hadn't been a good Christian previously, but I really prayed. And I was so determined to survive and get out, and with my military background helping me, I knew that I had to fight every way, almost like a prisoner of war. But if I didn't have that spiritual regeneration, I don't think I could have done it.
Listening to these people, I was reminded of the stark opening to Gillo Pontecorvo's Battle for Algiers. The French paratroopers had finally broken their man. He is abject, humiliated. What, I wondered, does a victim of this sort of treatment think of his tormentors? The answer was not what I expected.
The first time you want to take revenge, these people must pay. That's the first feeling. That's the first reaction. So maybe that is a survival reaction. But 10 years on, I mean, it's I don't know, because I don't hate them anymore. I mean, I think that they're lost. I mean, they are dead. Yes, they are walking, they're breathing, they are going on with their lives, but in a sense they are dead.
I feel very, very sorry, because they must have a conscience somewhere, because they are human beings as well. They can't live just like that. They must have nightmares as well.
That's something I realized when, for the first time, I was able to meet face-to-face a self-confessed torturer. Reni Hurtado had been an interrogator in El Salvador's notorious Treasury Police. Like most people in the torture business, he was recruited young, just 15 in fact. Eventually, appalled by what he'd been caught up in, he deserted and made his way to the United States. We met in Minnesota. He was in hiding, an illegal immigrant. For him, torture had been a tool in the fight against communist subversion. And once behind closed doors, you did anything.
Like, in torture, like, in everything, you don't have limitations, you know? Every day you will find new form of torture, new way to disappear people. You know, it's like in every business, you know, because for days this is a big business, you know, it's a business, torture.
This was El Salvador in the early 80s, a time when the victims of the Treasury Police could expect only one end.
I don't know if you saw somebody dying, it's slow, and asking, you know, for water, you know, sometimes, or sometimes they say, Mama, or help me, you know, most of the people, you know, for macho or whatever they are, and the last time they say, Ma. But because of the majority of people are young people, they say, I am young, I don't want to die. But they die, it's slow. Every mother, you know, have dreams about their children, hopes, you know, about the future. And I was killing those dreams in my country.
Asesinado el amor, gritos de un pueblo profeta.
René Hurtado was undoubtedly a person of sensitivity and intelligence. How he'd found himself in his situation, I was to understand better when we met again a couple of years later.
And this song is like the shadow, and this song is like the moon.
By then, helped by a particular church and various human rights organizations, he was no longer in hiding. He talked of his training. For those who've been in the army, it will have certain echoes, except in making a torturer, you have to go much, much further.
The training is about toughness, being tough, being better than somebody else. You are the best, and to be the best, you suffer a lot. I remember a sergeant, he used to tell us, look, son of a bitch, you will be the best, but now I am the best. I know that you want to beat me up, but you can't, because I'm better than you. One day, maybe you will be able to be macho, but now you left your balls outside of this barrack.
His father had been a landless peasant, his childhood hard and hungry. You escaped oppression by becoming the oppressor. In Hurtado's world, that meant joining the police or the military. In Latin cultures, it's called machismo, the cult of being the man.
Good.
But it's not so different in other parts of the world, and to a degree, it's natural. Learning to stand on your own 2 feet, learning to protect yourself and others. When you've done it, always come back and carry on boxing. But Hurtado's story was an unhappy reminder of how the natural can become unnatural, inhuman, perverted.
You had to use all means to destroy the enemy, conventional or not conventional means, because this is not a war with another country, when you had to use all those protocol of the Genevan Convention. They just fuck with this thing,
What he was talking about at this stage was the new way in modern warfare, counterinsurgency. And some of the lessons he'd been given, he said, came from the legendary Green Berets, the United States Special Forces. This is what changed the direction of my inquiry. Could it be that torture had become mixed up with the tough and legitimate counterinsurgency techniques that the Americans and indeed other Western democracies were using? Because what Hurtado had given me was a gruesome list of ways to torture people. Did any of that, I now asked him, figure in the lessons the Americans gave?
They encourage more emotional, psychological torture. This is what they say mostly, psychological torture. Because in psychological torture, you don't left any
marks
outside, but you destroy this person. You actually destroy this person. The only thing they say, but if you torture, if you kill somebody, try not to leave fingerprints. Fingerprints, I mean evidence. People will assume that you did, but no, they will not prove it. Okay, as long as they can prove it, you can do it. This is a war, and somebody had to be hurt, and we are here to help you. Our government is 100% behind you.
You mean it was American Green Berets that told you this thing?
Yeah.
With these people? I pushed him on this. Was he sure they were Green Berets? Well, not absolutely, he said. They were in uniform, but without insignia. And they certainly had the run of the U.S. Embassy.
They go to the embassy, they have parties in the embassies, in the residence. For them, those places are like heaven, because they don't go by the rules of the United States, This is the one thing, some people believe that maybe this is not true. What this guy is talking about is not true. What you're talking about, it's impossible. This cannot happen, because we have laws in this country that will prevent things like that. But you have laws in this country. You know, now in El Salvador, these people are open to do anything.
Was Hurtado lying about the American involvement? I asked myself. There were possible reasons why he might. On the other hand, here in his newfound country, just recently married, there were better reasons for keeping quiet. Some corroboration for his story came from an unexpected source.
Suddenly I was ushered into a room and it was well lit, and there was someone sitting there in Arab plain clothes. And he said, sit down, and would you like a cup of coffee? Would you like a cigarette? And I realized that this was another trap, and this is something that I'd learned in the past, because they had got me into a situation where the natural reaction was, here was a human being for the first time offering help, reaching out to me, and it would be very easy for me to gush completely.
Have you any idea where he was trained, this man?
During the course of the interrogation, when he was trying to be friendly, he said that he let slip that he had spent some time in the United States of America being trained, and that most of his colleagues in this center, which I later found out to be the secret police headquarters, had all been trained in the United States of America.
Now, it's well known that the United States both trains and supplies equipment to the police and military of other countries. But does it really teach torture, psychological or otherwise? At the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C., Luke Thompson, one-time sergeant in the Green Berets, pays tribute to his fallen comrades. He did 5 tours in Vietnam. Before that, in the late 50s, he was sent on secret missions into Laos. He was awarded numerous decorations for valor. An integral part of his training was interrogation.
Basic interrogation is taught straightforward. That's at the Military Intelligence School in Arizona. Regular Army soldiers going through an interrogation course. That's the conventional method. This is accepted by the Geneva Convention, the good guy stuff. The unconventional method is you use controlled terror. And controlled terror is where you control a man's emotions.
And how do you do that?
By controlling a man's emotions, you allow him to see the light of day. You don't allow him to see how he's going to make it. He has to have hope that he's not going to die. Everything else is agreeable. You can do anything else to him as you want, except to let him know that death is inevitable. In controlled terrorism, you don't mangle a man. That's brutality. Of course, some brutality may be necessary, but when you're trying to control a man's mind through terrorism, you have to keep the mind asking questions. For instance, if you had a little girl or a son or whatever, and I wanted to terrorize you, put you in holy terror, I would not bring that child in and brutalize them in front of you. You take the kid and you take it outside. If it's brutalized, the screams and so forth and so on, and let it continue. And you let all this is done outside of the man, and then you bring the mangled body in and let the man see it. He will wonder how it happened, what happened, and there will always be that question. There's no resolve.
Where did you learn about the theory and doctrine of terroristic torture?
In Special Forces.
Can you explain that to me?
Well, you had this in intelligence training. What they teach you is what you might have to do or might have done against you.
Was this written down in any manual of instruction?
I can't recall a manual. I can never recall seeing it written down.
So it was all passed on by word of mouth?
Mm-hmm. Yes. In fact, any notes taken of this subject never left the classroom.
Maybe not, but once conveyed by word of mouth, there's nothing to stop these practices from being published in the outside world. This booklet is purportedly written by an ex-Green Beret soldier and reads authentically. It was purchased at a Mississippi gun fair, adjacent to the booth recruiting mercenaries to aid the Contras in Nicaragua.
We've trained some special forces in some of the techniques, but terror, you don't have to really teach people terror. They define their own terror by their ethnic background. In Vietnam, the Vietnamese done the torture and all that stuff, although it was known by the Americans. We knew it. The torture was performed by the Vietnamese. We had clean hands. We didn't do it. We had deniability.
In the covert world of counterinsurgency, they call it plausible deniability. Crucial when the treatment being handed out is something neither the US government nor public would accept. But in Graciela Menendez's case, she says she knows Americans were involved. We met in Stockholm, where she's now a refugee. 2 years ago, she was an economist at the United States Embassy in El Salvador. Daughter of an eminent doctor, she had a reputation for being hardworking, demanding, and a loyal supporter of America's role in El Salvador. How did she see her own country with its poor record on human rights?
If I have to be honest, at the time I didn't care.
Did you believe it went on?
I didn't believe it.
At least she didn't believe it until she was arrested herself. It happened after the local guerrilla organization kidnapped the president's daughter. A short time earlier, 3 US Marines had been gunned down in cold blood while sitting at a sidewalk cafe. It was a time of high political tension. A mole was suspected inside the US Embassy. Under interrogation by the Treasury police, a man pointed the finger at Graciela Menendez. She was detained by 2 US security officers and interrogated. Getting neither an admission nor the answers they wanted, the senior man gave her an ultimatum.
He said, "Oh, Graciela, the ambassador wants to help you. We're going to get a helicopter to the embassy. We're going to take you out with your family. We're going to send you any country, wherever you want. We're going to give you any scholarship, whatever you want. But if you don't cooperate, we're going to give you to the Treasury police."
And that's exactly what they did. In deep distress, Graciela Menendez told me how she was blindfolded, taken out in a car, threatened with being thrown off a cliff, and in a state of abject terror, raped by several men.
And after that, they told me to stand up, and my legs were shaking. They were shaking. I mean, I couldn't even. But they told me to stand up with my hands like this. And since I was shaking, they put me under a jet of water. And I spent there, I don't know how long, under interrogation. And I was trying to please them. And it's like, let me explain it, it's like being in a mental hospital in the middle of psychopaths.
It was after several days of interrogation that the first American came. He said he'd been flown in from Panama to do a lie detector test. Another, who came later, claimed he'd been several years with the American police. He was from the embassy security section.
He was very tough. And wherever I go, I always remember his words. And he said, "Graciela, you know that we are paying the bills. So we are going to do this to the government. And we will keep you here 15 years. And after, we are going to submit charges against you. And we will request the maximum fine." And he said, "But if you manage to get out, we will destroy you. And we will destroy your family."
This American said this to you?
Yes, this one. That was the last time that I saw him. And he said, "Think of your children." And when he said that, he spoke very quietly. "Think of your children." And he mentioned their names. And then he did this to the table. "Your mother and your father will die. But everything can be different. It could be different if you cooperate."
When Britain's Sunday Times reported this case, it provoked an angry response in the US State Department. Elliot Abrams, President Reagan's Assistant Secretary for Inter-American Affairs, said that Graciela Menendez's story was a fabrication and that she was a woman believed to have lived a lie over the last several years. Mr. Abrams declined to be interviewed, but I spoke to one of his representatives at the State Department. He was confident that she had not been raped or tortured. And the reason he gave? Well, that for a number of years, US officials have kept a sharp eye on the Treasury Police to prevent such abuses. On this last point, he's right. We now have first-hand evidence that the Treasury Police in El Salvador have had installed two-way mirrors in their interrogation rooms. Our information is that this enables US security men to check day and night what goes on inside. But it didn't protect Graciela Menendez. She has lost her home, her job, her country. So what, I wondered, did she now think of the Americans she'd worked for?
In spite of the bad experience that I had with the American security officials, in spite of that I'm still afraid of, they could reach me in one way or in another. In spite of that, I want to make it clear that during the time that I work at the American Embassy, I met wonderful people. Some of them are extraordinarily intelligent and marvelous. And I think they don't know that these type of things are happening in the world.
Much of what Graciela suffered was what some like to call psychological torture. Techniques for battering the mind rather than the body. They were developed in the Soviet Union back in Stalin's day. In the 1930s, people wondered why the hard men of the Russian Revolution meekly confessed to nonsensical charges. But they did. Somehow their minds had been conditioned, allowing them to make faultless appearances in their own show trials.
The penalty for the crime, death.
Then there was Korea, the war I fought in. There it was called brainwashing, the Chinese technique for breaking a prisoner.
You could have a bomb that looked very much like a regular bomb, but would be loaded with insects and germs.
Do you remember this Hollywood movie of the 50s called Prisoner of War? It showed how the Chinese were supposed to have learnt their brainwashing techniques from the Russians.
There was in our motherland one of the great scientists of the world, Ivan Petrovich Pavlov. Professor Pavlov. He gained renown by his experiments with dogs and rats. This technique was called
conditioned reflex. When a rat went through the wrong door, it got an electric shock. When it went through the right door, it got a piece of cheese.
Exactly. We, in our work in political security, are adapting Pavlov's techniques to the fullest. In fact, we are going beyond Pavlov, because we are dealing with a higher organism, man.
Will this work with Americans, comrade?
In fact, in real life, it worked only too well. 1 in 3 American prisoners collaborated with their captors. They didn't all collaborate because of brainwashing, but the American military urgently set out to find ways of resisting such techniques.
A major component of the brainwashing procedure might well be the complete isolation from a normal environment.
What they came up with were training systems which, in one form or another, are now standard for most special forces around the world. And one force the Americans work closely with, according to Luke Thompson, is the British SAS.
We had a reciprocal thing. We had special forces trained with SAS in Herefordshire, and we had the SAS people trained at our school at Fort Bragg. These people sought the same enlightenment. We were a fraternity, and we discussed a lot of things. And as far as I'm concerned, they knew everything I knew, and probably more, and knew it as well as I did, or better.
The SAS have a distinctly lower profile than their US counterparts, only occasionally breaking cover, as they did in 1980 at the Iran embassy siege. Did they seek the same enlightenment? Were they instructed in the same techniques Sergeant Luke Thompson had described? Well, since the Ministry of Defense refused to say, I looked elsewhere.
Fred, as we know there are soldiers and soldiers, how would you describe yourself as a soldier if somebody asked you, if somebody put that to you?
I would like to think that I was a very professional soldier, in every sense of the word. I always wanted to go in the army. My mother used to call me Khaki Barmy from the age of 8.
Captain Fred Holroyd left the British Army 12 years ago. He's had his differences with them since then. He says the Army didn't like his criticism of their role in Northern Ireland. They say he was suffering from emotional stress. What isn't in dispute is his record before that. He tucked under his belt just about every gung-ho activity the Army had to offer. He'd served in Germany and in Malaysia with the Gurkhas. In Northern Ireland, he went underground, becoming part of the secret Special Military Intelligence Unit. Later, he spent 3 years with the Rhodesian Army. We talked about two particular aspects of his career about which I knew he had reservations. The first was his experience as the officer in charge of prisoner handling at the Winter Survival School at Bad Kohlgrub in Bavaria. At this secret establishment, they exposed servicemen most likely to be captured by the enemy to the process of so-called deep interrogation. The emphasis was more on the psychological approach and was based on scientific experiment.
And they were stripped naked and put with the hood still over their heads and put inside there and frozen for a while to lower their body temperature. They were then taken to the intermediary point between all the modules, which was an exercise area. There they were made to do physical exercises. Most of them could be persuaded to do this to keep warm, in fact, because they were having some minor convulsions, shivering. Some of them who couldn't be convinced that it was a good idea had to actually be held by 4 or 5 people who made them physically do the exercises. And the idea of this, of course, was to wear down their body heat, their body core heat, and to make them disorientated.
They were then subjected to what are called the 5 techniques: hooding, wall standing, white noise, and food and sleep deprivation. This was combined with violent verbal abuse and sexual humiliation.
They were made to bend over, they were searched, they had anal searches. The women usually ridiculed, or the woman who was present ridiculed their private parts, and they were generally humiliated. They were then taken back in for exercise again, and then they were taken in for interrogation.
In the summer of 1971, British security forces suddenly had scores of real interrogations to conduct. Northern Ireland was in turmoil. Murders, bombings, kneecappings and other atrocities were the stuff of each day's news. The security forces were scarcely able to cope. The government took drastic action. Over 2 days in August, 342 people were arrested and detained without trial. It was the start of internment.
Many people were out of market.
Paddy Joe McLean was one of those taken in. He was 39, a remedial teacher, active civil rights campaigner, but not a member of the IRA.
So a little boy called Mark was looking at...
By chance, as far as we know, he was one of the 14 men singled out for special treatment, guinea pigs for interrogators who wanted to try out some of the techniques which Major Fred Holroyd had seen practiced on servicemen in Bavaria.
That piercing sound would drive you mad. Wall standing, the body has 4 points of contact with the ground. The points of your fingers against the wall, the points of your toes with your legs wide apart. The result is that the small of your back carries the whole weight. And that's where fatigue settles in. I can't remember how long that we were kept in the position. But I know as far as I was concerned that I was kept there until I fell. Could stand no longer.
And what happened when you did fall?
A number of things happened. In one instance, I was handcuffed and hung up on the wall.
Who was doing this to you? I mean, did you ever have a chance to see who the men were that were handling you in this way?
Yes. I saw them once. The hood fell off, and I saw 4 lean young men. They were stripped to the waist. I took them to be army men. They reminded me of PE instructors in a gym. And they were lithe and lean and supple, and they never uttered a sound. We never thought that civilization, would allow that sort of brutalization of people. We thought we'd passed that centuries ago.
When reports of the brutalities emerged, the British government at first denied it. They set up an inquiry under Sir Edmund Compton, who concluded that no one had suffered physical brutality as we understand the term. A second inquiry under Lord Justice Parker said there had been brutality, but that such methods were justified when dealing with evil men. None of the 14, as it happened, were ever charged, but the central argument was a simpler issue. Does the end of beating terrorism justify the means by which it's done? The Prime Minister of the day, Edward Heath, listened to the dissenting voices on the Parker Committee and elsewhere, and stopped deep interrogation in Northern Ireland. 6 years later, the European Court of Human Rights found Britain guilty of brutal, inhuman, and degrading treatment of prisoners. No torture, reported the Daily Mail, a verdict that many doctors who'd studied deep interrogation disputed. Meanwhile, other, less subtle forms of interrogation were coming to light.
Oh, he said, we are here to prove that these accusations are right, that they are true. And I said, they are not true. And he said, well, what way do you want it? I asked him what did he mean. And with that, he drew out and he hit me a box up the side of the face.
One of the leaders gave Baden-Powell.
Bernard O'Connor was another member of the civil rights movement who fell foul of the security forces. He was a teacher who gave much of his time to the Scout movement, but they thought he knew more. He was interviewed by the BBC.
I was then told to take my underpants off. Then various jokes and jibes were made about my private parts. One of them took the waste bin that was in the corner of the room and stuck it down over the top of my head, with the litter falling right down over my clothing and onto the floor. And I was made pick up each cigarette butt in my mouth and put it back in the bucket like a dog would.
Today, 10 years on, Bernard O'Connor is still a teacher, I discovered. There was never a charge against him. He was left with £5,000 compensation and a brain lesion. He did feel angry, but not against the people who'd actually interrogated him.
People were amazed when I said that, no, I didn't hold any personal grudge against the people that actually tortured me in Castlereagh. But I would feel quite angry towards the establishment that has such interrogation centres in existence. I mean, there are people who are behind the scenes manipulating and setting up and structuring this kind of situation. And one of the things that was said to me several times while being interrogated in Castlereagh, that when some of the interrogators would, on brief occasions, attempt to be friendly to you, they would explain that they have even gone to England and received special training to be able to interrogate people. And obviously, it's a well-structured system.
I remember it was said of Bernard O'Connor's treatment in Castlereagh that it was an isolated incident, not part of a pattern.
I have the greatest respect for the RUC.
But 2 years later, Dr. Robert Irwin, a police surgeon whose job was to examine prisoners from Castlereagh, finally broke his silence, saying he had seen over 150 cases of ill treatment. Less publicly, Dr. Dennis Elliott, senior medical officer at another detention centre, asked to be transferred. I sought him out last year and found him still discreet.
Dr. Elliott, was it just 1 or 2 incidents that made you resign your job at the Gough Detention Centre?
Oh, no, I wouldn't have left in those circumstances. It was a build-up over a period which forced me to ask for a transfer. I can't go into details of that, but it was a build-up. It wasn't just one or two incidents. That could happen anywhere.
What do you mean by that?
I can't go into details because it was part of my contract, and under the Official Secrets Act, I would be putting myself in a perilous position. I'm not at liberty to go into details.
In effect, if there were such things as cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment taking place, you, as a medical officer, could not say that publicly.
That's correct.
I found my meeting with Dr. Elliot depressing, because the Official Secrets Act, as presently defined, prevents the abuses he encountered ever being exposed to public scrutiny. But do these things stay secret? They certainly don't amongst the families and friends of detainees, as Father Dennis Fall confirmed. He's a Catholic priest who has spoken out not just on behalf of Republican prisoners, but against the violence on both sides.
Well, the men themselves can forget and forgive, most of them, but not the relations. It's the relations that has the dreadful effect on the relatives. They take it very badly, and it'd be very hard to get them ever again to have any confidence in the police or law and order forces of that type, you know. It was the internment and the torture that really gave the provisioners their great jumping off ground, plus the Bloody Sunday incidents, murder of 14 people. But the torture was continuous, and it was permeating communities, and the stories were coming out of the jails, and they were being printed in the papers, and we printed a lot of booklets ourselves. I mean, it was quite ruthless. I said, if the British won't listen to it, it'll be published worldwide. And the nice people in New York would go into their nice British friends and say it isn't true. You don't do that kind of thing. You play cricket, you don't torture people. But it was true. Very, very true, unfortunately. And has been totally disastrous in Anglo-Irish relations. They're only now beginning to recover from it, you know.
Things have changed in Northern Ireland since then, not least because of a third government inquiry, that of the Bennett Commission. It recommended many changes, and today both the police and the army work to a much stricter code of practice. In fact, within that code, British techniques for combating terrorism have developed to such a point that the rest of the world is seeking our know-how. This is being turned, for better or worse, to commercial advantage. London now enjoys a reputation for being the major recruiting centre for the sophisticated new-style mercenary, highly trained, conversant in modern techniques, and with operational experience. Many people well placed to know the implications of this are worried. Captain Fred Holroyd.
As we get more and more counter-terrorism, more and more counter-insurgency within the Western world, I'm very disturbed at the reports that I've been getting, certainly, from some of my ex-colleagues who in fact serve in various places. I have friends serving in the Middle East and the Far East with various private companies, ex-servicemen who learnt these techniques in the service, who are teaching these techniques to armies abroad to use in their own counter-terror campaigns.
Can you think of any examples of that?
Well, I know of at least 2 countries where this has gone on, yes.
Where?
Well, all I can suggest is open your newspaper. We have Sri Lanka for a start.
There were chaotic scenes at Heathrow this evening following the government's decision to expel all but 6 of the Tamils.
The test in Britain for illegal immigrants who want to be classified as refugees is this. Can you show that you're running for your life? Well, I don't know about these men, but Sri Lanka these days is certainly a dangerous place. Very different from the idyllic island I remember. Last year I went back. Now I found a country horribly disfigured by its bitter ethnic conflict. But this was not a war confined to the local people. Allegations abounded that former British soldiers from the SAS and other units were covertly training Sri Lankan forces.
In the skies over Jaffna, the government forces are in control, relying on a mishmash of helicopters and weapons bought from international arms dealers, for whom Sri Lanka is today the biggest new market. Air power that often uses white pilots contracted out by a Channel Islands company, mercenaries, mainly British, who won't talk.
They were called the KMS, the Kini Mini Services. They took on men recently retired, mainly from the SAS and the Parachute Regiment. Not all were British, some were ex-Rhodesians, others from South Africa. Their recruiting offices were in South Kensington, their registered offices in the Channel Islands. In Sri Lanka, they were stationed near a small coastal town called Katakurunda. Some lived in the plush Tangerine Hotel, others on base. You might get to talk to them late in the evening over a drink, but never on camera. They were, in the words of Luke Thompson, a fraternity, and a tight-lipped one at that. Their job? To take young men, mainly from remote, sleepy villages, and within 6 months mould them into an elite, a new paramilitary police unit called the Special Task Force.
1, 2, 3, 4. 3, 4. Whiskey. Whiskey. No good. No good. Cigarettes. Cigarettes. No good. No good. Women. Women. No good. No good.
Many Sri Lankans felt concern. Archaeologist Dr. Senavaratna from a traditional military family was one.
Here is a middle class, a well-behaved, a very sweet-natured child, whom as I knew him. After his 6 months of training with the KMS, and after his first stint in the East Coast, after joining the STF, this boy literally came with a kind of a demonic face. Absolutely changed, transformed, a lost look. Not willing to communicate. He was, he was a different individual altogether.
On the pattern of...
I went on to talk about this with one of Sri Lanka's Catholic bishops.
I'm a Britisher, and I feel a concern because they are trained first and foremost back at Katakurunda by the KMS.
Kini Mini Services.
The Kini Mini Services. Right. Now, have they got, have
Well,
they played a role in this?
I should think so, because all these have contributed to the formation and the training of the security forces. Yeah. I won't like to tell it to you, but all the same it's understood.
As in other countries, coarsened and brutalized by civil war, young Sri Lankans now emulate the new universal heroes, the men without sentiment, dead-eyed, cold, robotic, the professionals. Arnold Schwarzenegger's Commando was a particular favorite at the various camps of the Special Task Force. At least, that's what I was told by Father Pius, a local priest.
You know, we were internationalized. We were brought to an international standard, our security measures, and also in our interrogation methods. A number of things unheard of in this country till 5 years ago.
Atrocities were happening on both sides, of course. Father de Koning described a dawn raid by the Special Task Force on his congregation.
Well, they tied, like they would tie the animals together, and then they put them on the ground face downwards, and they were walking around over them, and then beating them with big clubs and iron rods. They were ordered to just to look up. And then as they looked up, they give a very forceful kick on their chins. And they must have seen stars, surely.
And you saw that?
Oh yes, I saw with my own eyes.
The particular unit he was talking about came from this place, Kaladi Camp. It had figured prominently in a report on torture prepared by Amnesty International. I went there and asked the commanding officer whether torture had ever been used. Of course not, he said. Would he care to confirm this on film? Courteously, he declined. My visit coincided with the peace accord that had just been signed. Later that day, I came across some young detainees who had just been released. A doctor confirmed that all those he'd examined had been tortured, some horrifically.
As a result of this torture, did you suffer any injuries?
Yes.
What are the injuries? Have you any marks,
Yes,
scars of
I have
injuries?
scars.
Could you show that, please?
Yes. Yeah.
Remove your shirt. Would you mind removing your baby? You mean heated iron was placed on your chest?
Yeah.
This young man was once a clerk working in a factory. There was no case against him. He was simply lifted in a routine search and control operation. He'd been taken to Kaladi Camp. He was shy to reveal his more severe scars in a public place. Only later in private did he show us.
And they had to have some form of torture they had to bear up.
Do you mean to say people, young men, were automatically tortured if they were taken into custody?
Not necessarily young men. Any person taken into custody
was tortured
in some degree or the other.
Despite official denials, it's quite clear that many people have been tortured, and tortured in a structured and systematic way. It's also clear that the Special Task Force has often been to blame. Now, I'm not suggesting that anyone in KMS gave training in torture. What I am suggesting, though, is that the general training techniques they employ, techniques that are fast becoming standard practice these days, have had a brutalizing effect, and that superimposed on local animosities and homegrown techniques has contributed, in situations beyond the control of KMS, to an increase in the sort of thing we've seen in this film. It does seem to me it's a legitimate cause for concern that a company, operating on some occasions with the tacit approval of the British government, should train people involved in civil conflicts in which atrocities of this kind occur. Now, I know many people will say I'm missing the point, whether it's Sri Lanka, Northern Ireland, or anywhere else where charges of torture have been leveled against the controlling power. What the other side, the enemy, is doing is much worse, and somebody's got to stop them. I remember in '82, when the IRA set off those nail bombs in 2 of London's parks, and they collected bits of people and horses in plastic bags.
The woman that I went to see if I could help was lying face down, and she was trying to pick herself up. The whole of her face just seemed to be a mass of blood and raw skin, basically. I mean, she was in absolute agony. She just didn't know what to do with herself.
The guards were just standing there, bewildered, just shouting, "Bastards, the bastards."
Why, it's asked, should the perpetrators of this be protected from torture or anything else? In these days of international terrorism, there are many people in many countries who would go along with anything to stop such outrages. But that's the next question. Are there circumstances where the end justifies the means? Where torture can be condoned by the results it yields? The next person I talked to was another interrogator, Sean Graham, who now works in the City of London. During the war, he served as a colonel with the Combined Services Direct Interrogation Centre, CISDIC as it was called. His job was to interrogate, amongst others, high-ranking German officers who could give information that might save many lives.
And this was something which was drilled into us right from the beginning, that in order to be an effective interrogator, you had to win the trust of the client concerned. He had to be friendly with you. He had to trust you. And the system we used at that time was that you were the only human being he saw. Possibly then you might be a pair interrogating, but it was very rarely a hard and a soft. But that happened very, very rarely for the very simple reason that we were too thinly stretched and we couldn't afford to assign 2 officers to 1 man.
You mean to say that at no stage would you use torture?
It's totally inconceivable. We did know about concentration camps long before most other people did. We were absolutely horrified. Our determination to end this evil regime was absolutely solid. I would like to be able to say that we had moral scruples, and the truth of the matter is I and my colleagues had none. We would have tortured, quite sure of it, had we been convinced, or had somebody told us that the thing worked. And we knew that it didn't work. In the first time I saw an SS officer captured in front of me, helpless. And he was the fellow, I'm Jewish, and he was the fellow who had killed and was killing people then. There was considerable hate coming from my side. But it's not effective, it's as simple as that. The man simply, he expects to have a rough time with you. He expects to button up. And that is the very thing you don't want. You want him to talk, and you don't want him to lie.
But what about things such as sleep deprivation, food deprivation, putting a man in, well, obviously in isolation, that you've said already.
They were in isolation.
What, and things like sexual humiliation?
Impossible, really was.
And sleep deprivation?
No,
Food deprivation?
no, sleep deprivation was possible. We sometimes interrogated through the night. It was mainly U-boats who were picked up, U-boat crews. If somebody was flown to us, naval personnel, German naval personnel, and we had reasons to believe that they might know where their rendezvous for the wolf pack was. Then there would be urgency to break the man within 24 hours, whether there was something there, that sort of thing. But it was
then
very
what
rare.
would you do?
Then you go through the night, on and on and on, and maybe with two.
See, a lot of people would say, yeah, this is all very well if you've got the time. But when speed is of the essence, then you've got to use tougher methods.
Well,
I mean, how successful were you?
Well, we think we were extraordinarily successful. There was, in the years I was there was only one man, there was only one case, and he was an SS major, whom we didn't break.
The classic situation. You've got a bomb on a plane, you know you've got the man who's planted it, it's going to go off in 2 hours' time, and for good measure, you've got your wife and children on that plane. What would you do about that?
I would use trickery, quite unscrupulously, perhaps, but I would arrange a situation where the man was taken into a field or away from buildings and people. He was tied, and I would put a bracelet around his neck of what appeared in every way to be authentic explosives, with a timing device set to go within 10 seconds of the timing device of the bomb that he had planted. Now, I'm talking about a man who is known to have put a bomb on a plane, absolutely known, no doubt in anybody's mind. And I would say to the man, when that bomb goes off, 10 seconds later, your head goes off with this girdle of explosives. Now, in fact, they wouldn't be explosives at all, but he wouldn't know that. And I would hope, like mad, that that would work. If the man didn't speak, then we would lose the plane and the people in it, and he would realize after 10 seconds afterwards that he'd been taken to the cleaners. But I suspect he would have to be a very dedicated and brave terrorist to take that chance.
Of course, we know that sometimes under torture, people will talk. But how reliable is the information they give?
Yes, but our received wisdom was, if your man is frightened, if your client is frightened of you, because he's likely to be hit, or you brutalize the man, he will tell you what you want to know.
But not necessarily
That
the
is
truth.
not the truth. That is not the truth.
So what you're getting is a confession
what you're getting
rather
is
than an accurate
something.
intelligence.
What you're getting from him is something which will stop you, the interrogator, from hitting him, from torturing him. And he will say anything.
You were kept with the Treasury Police for 15 days.
Yes.
Did you sign a confession?
I signed many papers, and if they told me to sign, I sign it. If they told me to put fingertips, I put fingertips. If they told me, when they were questioning me, I was answering the things that I thought that were going to please them.
And did you read the confessions?
No. When I signed, I was blindfolded. I signed many times, many times.
In Vietnam, we'd capture someone, Viet Cong, we'd put him in the cell, and they would wire the man's testicles up to a telephone generator and turn the juice on. And they would give you any information you wanted, or thought you wanted, whether it was real or they thought just something you wanted to hear. That's not necessarily what you were looking for, not true. What you're looking for is something that bona fide information. You want to know that this man is telling you the truth. And most of the tortured interrogations, you get distortions, what the people want you to hear. There's no reason to torture someone because they're not, chances are you're not going to get what you want.
So it's not the best way?
No, it's not the best way at all. They're going to give you what they think you want or what will sustain them. They'll give you the Gettysburg Address if they thought that make you feel better.
You must stay within the rule of law. The minute you break the law, you put yourself as an alternative to the terrorist, which is no good at all. You've lost the moral right to fight against the terrorist. And I think this is most important because we have watched Western nations time and time again, even in relatively modern history, lose campaigns, lose wars, because they resorted to the tactics of the terrorist. Counter-terror does not work. It just does not work.
When Italy's ex-Prime Minister Aldo Moro was murdered by the Red Brigades, the country's chief of police was asked to sanction the torture of suspects. His reply was, "Italy can survive the loss of Aldo Moro. It will not survive the introduction of torture." Last year, Amnesty International received reports of torture from 87 countries.
These scars are now well healed.
The majority came from places where you would expect it, dictatorships and totalitarian regimes of one sort or another. But some came from countries we treat as friends, Commonwealth countries, for instance, where the line between counter-terrorism and torture has been blurred. The truth is that there's no single objective line between them. It's a political judgment which each country makes for itself. But for the victim, the result is the same, whatever name it trades under. It's 10 years since Luis Munoz was tortured. He knew he was on the way to recovery when he found he could cry again.
I felt the need all the time when I was in that torture center, that need of crying, because I couldn't. In front of them, I wouldn't cry. I won't give you a tear. Then in the concentration camp, never. Now, 10 years later, I've been able to cry. I've been able to, not carrying with myself all that sadness, all that pain, all that hate. I've been able to get rid of those things so I can live again, really live. I'm alive again. And I want to make a hymn to life.